Eccoci qua, siamo con Don Levy, il direttore del Siena College Research Institute. Mr. Levy, thank you very much. It's a pleasure having you here.
Thank you very much. Glad you asked.
Now, we have a few things to ask you about the politics in the USA, of course, but also about the um, what you actually just published just a few weeks ago on the New York Times. But let's start about the Republican primaries. So, in the Republican primary, the field is shrinking. For instance, we have seen Pence and Scott that withdrew in the last few weeks. Could this contribute to create a strong anti-Trump candidate? And if yes, between Haley and DeSantis, who is more likely to become Trump's main competitor?
Well, certainly we've seen of late Nikki Haley is starting to pick up some traction, some momentum. She has done well in the recent debates, and she certainly has positioned herself as an alternative to Donald Trump. You know, one area that she stands out is on the issue of abortion. She has a much more middle ground position on abortion than most of the Republican Party. And she also is a candidate who, as most Republicans are asking for, is moving on from January 6th. Is not relitigating the past. Ron DeSantis, who started the primary season with a tremendous amount of momentum, he was seen as the potential challenger to Trump. But as time has gone on, he has become more of an alternative should Donald Trump drop out of the race, which at this point, there's no evidence that that is a likelihood that that's happening at this point. So it would appear at this point in time that Nikki Haley is the more likely challenger than is Ron DeSantis. The rest of the field could very well whittle down. Chris Christie obviously is the only candidate in the field who is aggressively criticizing Donald Trump. And of course, Nikki Haley is going to have to make a decision at some point whether she can walk what is a very difficult line whereby she tries to retain the ultimate support of the Trump base while criticizing him. All that said, Donald Trump still has a commanding lead in all the polling done in any and all of the Republican primaries, and time is becoming quite short. The primaries are going to start in the month of January, so really Haley's only got a couple of months to try to make up ground to still be viable. Clearly, she's hoping to get to South Carolina, her home state. Her competitor in South Carolina, Tim Scott, the current sitting United States Senator from South Carolina, dropping out of the race is a bit of a help to her. But at this point in time, Trump has a commanding lead, and it would seem as though Haley, more so than DeSantis, who's widely seen as another version of Trump. In fact, some of the people that we have polled say, well, why would I vote for Ron DeSantis when I could have the real thing, Donald Trump? I think we're going to perhaps get into this. Should Trump falter? Should Trump be convicted of serious federal crimes in either the document case or the January 6th case, then more Republican voters may very well migrate away from him towards a Nikki Haley.
Yeah, we'll go to the conviction, potential conviction in a bit. First, I want to ask you now on the Democratic side, because we've seen that President Biden's approval numbers are poor, and a relevant part of the Democrat electors would like a different candidate. However, in the primary, Biden, I mean, at least in the polls, Biden still has a strong lead on the other two candidates. Why doesn't this primary seem as competitive as the one in 1980, the one who had Carter against Ted Kennedy? Do voters want Biden to step back without voting against him?
Well, certainly Democratic voters are conflicted. Joe Biden has been a standard bearer of the Democratic Party now for a long time. They know Joe Biden. They feel as though he is the generic mainstream Democrat. And many voters say they like him personally, but there are problems with Joe Biden, notably his age. Even half of Democrats, even half of people who say they voted for Joe Biden in the 2020 election say they think he's too old to be an effective president were he to be reelected in 2024. That's a very difficult hurdle to overcome. And as you point out, a majority of Democrats right now say, given the choice, I'd like someone else. However, there really isn't a someone else of the stature of Ted Kennedy in 1980. There is no Democrat opposing Joe Biden who has that kind of name recognition, that kind of stature, that kind of history in the party. And despite the fact that a vast majority of Americans in general, and even a small majority of Democrats say, I think Joe Biden is too old. I question whether he has the mental acuity. I don't think he's as an effective a steward of the economy as is Donald Trump. Despite all that, he's the president of the United States. He has the benefits of incumbency. And it certainly appears, unless Joe Biden decides to drop out of the race, then it would be a different field. When we polled and we said, would you vote for Donald Trump or Joe Biden? Then Trump is up in the 6 battleground states that we looked at. If the question was, how about just a generic Democrat, some Democrat without naming them against Donald Trump, the unnamed Democrat wins. So that gives fuel to this fire of surely there should be someone else. When we look at young voters lack enthusiasm for Joe Biden. He's 81 years old, and many voters who are in their late teens, 20s, 30s, into their 40s, they see Joe Biden as a remarkably old person, and it does, his candidacy doesn't resonate with them. All that said, he is the president of the United States. The nomination is his if he wants it. There is no serious competition in the Democratic Party, and more than likely, quite quickly within the primary season, it will be Biden's nomination. Biden is certainly campaigning, saying he thinks people will come around. Over the coming year, they will come to appreciate the work that he has done in the economy, the work that he has done on the international scene, the work he has done bringing NATO together to support the Ukraine, the work that he's currently doing, trying to navigate the situation in the Middle East. His most recent meetings with Xi from China. So Biden recognizes that he's 81 years old. He does seem to feel as though he continues to be the only person that can protect American democracy from who he thinks is a threat to American democracy, that being Donald Trump. So there does not appear to be any evidence that he's going to step aside, and clearly there was no serious competition. It's an entirely different case when Ted Kennedy, who had been a well-known figure in the Democratic Party, who at that point was part of the Kennedy family that traced very quickly a direct line to his 2 older brothers. He was a United States Senator, and Jimmy Carter was at that point struggling with runaway inflation. And even in the midst of all that, the incumbency of Jimmy Carter prevailed over what was a very serious challenge from Ted Kennedy. Joe Biden faces no challenge of that magnitude right now.
Now, you mentioned the poll that it was published on the New York Times, that it was pretty shocking. Actually, it went around the globe, including Italy.
Yes.
And of course, there was Trump leading Biden in all battleground states except for Wisconsin. In particular, Trump would have a very strong result in Nevada, a state he lost twice. Is this a sign that is increasing his appeal to Latino voters?
It is. It is clearly a sign. I mean, right now in our most recent polling, we've got Latinos for Biden by about 15 points. And this is a group that 2 election cycles ago were about a plus 60 for the Democrat over the Republican. So that gap has closed. I think that any political observer, and I'm sure your viewers are acute viewers of American politics. It's always certainly exciting and energizing, when I have an opportunity to speak to Italians, how very closely they follow American politics. Americans certainly don't return the favor. That said, I think that what we're looking at here is a growing appreciation that Latinos are by no means a monolithic group. There's a variance by country of origin. There's a variance by the number of generations that they have been in the United States. So we see a more heterogeneous outcome when you poll Latinos more similar to other groups where there's variation. Young Latinos, older Latinos, Latino business people, Latinos who immigrated here from South America, Mexico, Cuba, Venezuela. We see variation across that whole spectrum. Some groups of Latinos, notably, for example, Cubans, South Floridians, now a growing contingency in Nevada who have been in the United States for 2, 3, 4, in some cases 5 or more generations, are starting to move to a more conservative outlook and are gravitating away from Biden or the Democrats towards Trump. Certainly, Trump has succeeded to a certain degree in labeling Biden and his policies as being socialistic, and an anti-socialistic fervor is one that plays increasingly well amongst the Latino voter in the southwestern United States, and plays very well among South Floridian Latinos. So clearly, if we're speaking from a strategy point of view, the Democrats are concerned. They have to do extremely well amongst Black voters, and there's been some erosion there. Our poll, in some cases, has as many as 1 out of 5 Black voters saying that they would vote Republican, that they would vote Trump. And that's a constituency that the Democrats need to hold, certainly north of 85%, if not into the 90s. In terms of Latinos, if that gap is as small as 15 points, that's a concern for Democrats. That's an area where they've got to seek to shore up the support that they had come to anticipate and expect amongst Latino voters, and move that closer to the 30-point margin, which would certainly help them. But clearly, I think you've centered in on an item that was in our poll that demonstrates an area of concern. And yes, most notably in the state of Nevada, where Joe Biden won previously, and now is razor thin, couple points. And now we show in our poll as much as an 11-point spread, Trump over Biden in Nevada, in part aided by that shift, that movement amongst multi-generational American Latinos who have become more conservative and have migrated towards Republicans in general and Trump specifically.
Now, we discussed one of the candidates in the 80s, and now let's talk about another candidate with the same last name, which is Robert Kennedy Jr. So in the same poll, you gave a huge result, 24%, to Robert Kennedy Jr. in the battleground states. With these results and both the other candidates being very weak, would it be possible for him to gain electoral votes? And would it create more damage to Trump or to Biden?
Well, that's a really, really provocative and exciting question. Let me try to give you an answer to it. We were somewhat surprised by the level of support that Robert Kennedy Jr. got in the poll. He is not as well known by a long way compared to either Trump or Biden. And we wondered, is this the Kennedy mystique? Is this still people who remember his uncle John F. Kennedy, his father Robert Kennedy, his other uncle Ted Kennedy? What we found that was quite interesting was that the age group who were least likely to say that they supported Robert Kennedy were older Americans who were 60, 65 and above. So the Americans who would remember, who would have a historic connection to Camelot, to the Kennedy mystique, were least likely to say that they were going to vote for Robert Kennedy. In fact, of voters in the 6 battleground states who were 45 years of age or younger, Robert Kennedy polls stronger by a couple of points, but still stronger than either Trump or Biden. So you put that together, and really you recognize that Robert Kennedy, while some folks say, "Oh, I agree with everything he says," what we're really seeing here is a protest vote, a level of dissatisfaction that voters right now have with both Trump and with Biden, and especially amongst young voters who say those other two guys, Biden or Trump, they're too old. So Robert Kennedy is a younger, he is a less entrenched in party orthodoxy. Young voters like that. Young voters say, I don't need the Democrats, I don't need the Republicans. I need someone who's going to fix government. And that's certainly been Robert Kennedy's stated mantra. Whether he's going to get electoral votes, there's a long, long trail that has got to be traversed in order to get there. First, he's got to get on the ballot in every state. And this is about the only thing that Trump backers and Biden backers are going to agree on, is to try to keep him off the ballot. Because what we found was that he hurts both of the candidates. He seems to, in our poll, hurt Trump slightly more than he hurts Biden. So some of the races that were a dramatic lead for Trump in a two-way become tighter. With Robert Kennedy in the race, for example, in Arizona, it goes from a 5-point lead for Trump to break even. We see it get closer in Michigan. We see it get closer in Pennsylvania. Georgia actually stays about the same. It goes 1 point in the other direction. So Georgia is the only state where we see Robert F. Kennedy hurting Biden more than Trump. Wisconsin, we see no change. It's 2 points for a Biden lead over Trump, whether Robert F. Kennedy is in the race or out of the race. Clearly, we're going to see young people gravitate to the Kennedy candidacy more than older people. But as yet, it's not clear whether he's going to make it to the ballot. At the same time, both campaigns are going to start to try to convince their voters, and as well as not just their strong voters, but their weak voters, that a vote for Robert F. Kennedy they're going to claim is a wasted vote. While they may not agree with Joe Biden or Donald Trump on every single thing, a vote for Robert F. Kennedy doesn't help them, doesn't help America, doesn't help move the agenda forward, that they're hoping a voter is slightly closer to Biden, slightly closer to Trump. Now, I have to say that third-party candidates will play into this election. Jill Stein has thrown her name in. She did pull a little bit over 3% when she ran in 2016. We still have a potential Cornel West candidacy. The No Labels group is certainly a potential to field a candidate in some states. Joe Manchin of late has been mentioned. And, the interplay of all these third-party candidates in an election where, if indeed it's Donald Trump versus Joe Biden, there is a sizable percentage, as many as 20% of voters, who don't like either Joe Biden or Donald Trump. Those voters, if it's a head-to-head, many of them have to hold their nose and say, I'll vote for the candidate that I dislike the least. If they have an option, especially with young people, they may very well gravitate to RFK and or some of these other third-party candidates. And in these razor-thin battleground states, it could very well make a difference. Right now, we can't say that it's definitively going to throw the election one way or another. Our polling points to an RFK candidacy being slightly more helpful to Joe Biden than it is to Donald Trump.
Now, the last question, because you mentioned it earlier, which is Trump's conviction. So your poll, again, showed that in case of Trump's conviction, he will lose between 8 and 23% of his support in those states. Do you think that this loss could be recovered in the weeks following the potential conviction, or this event will be just the end of Trump as the Republican candidate?
Well, it's difficult to say that one event, one current in this 2024 election cycle is the most explosive. But this is pretty much it. To have a major party candidate, a former president of the United States, under multiple federal indictments, approaching trial, being under indictment in the state of Georgia, facing civil trials. We've never seen this before in the United States. And so we asked people who told us they were not committed to voting for Joe Biden. If Trump were convicted and sentenced to prison, who would you vote for? And as you point out, we see movement. We see some movement towards Biden. We see some of those voters that say, I'll vote for somebody else. If Trump goes to jail, I won't vote for Trump. I'll vote for somebody else. And some people just couldn't tell us in that scenario who they would vote for. And the result was that we're in a head-to-head. Trump carries 5 of these 6 key states. And again, for the folks tuning in, just to make it clear, those states are in the Southwest, Nevada, Arizona, in the Southeast, Georgia, and then in the upper Midwest, the great states of Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. We found that it goes from Trump winning 5 of 6, and if that were the result, almost assuredly being elected president, to Biden winning all 6. So right now, that's what people say would be the impact of a conviction and being sentenced to prison. What's going to happen when this actually occurs? It's difficult to say because we recognize that amongst Trump supporters, they will become even more vehement in their support for Trump if there is a conviction, because they don't think the trial is appropriate. They don't think it's warranted. They think it's a political persecution. They're going to be even more strident in their support for Trump. The migration takes place amongst the weaker voters, the independents, the swing voters, and it does look like that is going to negatively impact Trump. Could he recover that support? Hard question. What's the Republican Party going to do? If Trump were to be convicted in the case that is currently slated to go to trial in March, it's in the middle of the Republican primary season. Many of the primaries will already have taken place. The Republican Party would be in a quandary, and they'd have to face the possibility that they would consider altering their rules and allowing delegates to come to a convention no longer bound by the primary outcome. That would be unprecedented. Still, I think that, to answer your question, my crystal ball just simply doesn't work that well. I think that it's an unprecedented event in American politics. We have over half of voters in our poll say that they think Donald Trump committed serious federal crimes, but still they're willing to vote for him. 40% think that he's a threat to democracy. Many are still willing to vote for him. Why? It really does come down to the economy more than any other issue. Voters tell us in these 6 states that they think the economy is doing no better than fair or poor. They believe by a margin of 22 points that Trump is better on the economy than is Biden. So that continues to weigh, to contribute to the decision that voters make. And even if Donald Trump is convicted, even if he is sentenced, that'll all be under appeal for a long period of time. If he manages to hold the Republican Party together and is the candidate, it appears from our polling that Biden would then have an advantage, but it still says it would be competitive, as shocking as that is.
There is still a long way to go to next year to the election, so a lot of things can happen. Of course, we will follow the primaries and then the presidential campaign next year. Hopefully, we will have you another time in the next few weeks or months. For now, thank you very much, Mr. Levy, for being with us. It was a real pleasure.
Grazie. Thank you very much for having me.